Tanya McKinley, born on January 25, 1961 in the quaint American town of Milton, Florida, was raised in a warm and affectionate family environment, forming a strong bond with her elder sister. Their childhood was filled with outdoor adventures, skateboarding, and bowling. Upon completing her high school education, Tanya made the bold decision to relocate to Pensacola, a mere 25 miles away from her hometown, in pursuit of exploring the realm of medicine. She set her sights on a career as a medical transcriptionist, a profession that required no medical degree but specialized training. Accompanied by her cousin Vanita, the two women shared an apartment to cut down on expenses. It was in Pensacola that Tanya crossed paths with Tim, igniting a romantic relationship that led to the birth of their son, Timothy, in 1983. Despite the joy of motherhood, Tanya's relationship with Tim was tumultuous, leading to their eventual separation. Seeking solace, she temporarily moved in with her cousin, who had since started a family of her own. Tanya's plan was to secure her own place as soon as the opportunity arose. On December 31, 1984, Tanya, Vanita, and her husband decided to welcome the new year at a local bar, leaving their children at a late-night daycare. As the clock struck midnight, ushering in 1985, Tanya found herself torn between the responsibilities of motherhood and the rare chance to unwind and enjoy herself. Opting to stay longer at the bar, she entrusted her cousin with the task of picking up her son from the daycare. This arrangement posed no issues since they lived together, and Vanita needed to also pick her kids. Prior to bidding farewell, Vanita inquired of Tanya's transportation plan back home, given that they had driven to the bar in their own vehicle. Tanya reassured her, citing the abundance of familiar faces at the establishment, ensuring she would secure a ride without difficulty. Come the dawn of January 1st, Vanita awoke to the startling realization that Tanya had yet to return. It struck her as peculiar, for Tanya should have been back by then. Initially, Vanita speculated that Tanya might have sought refuge with a friend, hence her initial lack of alarm. However, everything took a drastic turn when Vanita's anxious mother-in-law arrived at their doorstep, bearing the tragic news: Tanya had been discovered deceased. In the dead of night, around 3 a.m., a Pensacola resident and her daughter were on their way to a veterinary clinic due to their dog's pressing health concerns. As they departed their house, the daughter saw something peculiar by the roadside. Mistaking it for a mannequin, she relayed her observation to her mother. Intrigued, the woman ventured closer, only to be met with horror upon realizing it was a human body. Hastening back home, she promptly contacted the authorities. Law enforcement promptly responded to the scene, uncovering the lifeless form of a young woman sprawled in an empty lot adjacent to the road. Her attire disheveled, with tights askew, dress hiked up, and shoes absent. Beside her lay a blue towel stained with crimson hues, reminiscent of blood. The deceased was identified as 23-year-old Tanya McKinley. A short distance away, her footwear and purse, containing an ID bearing her name, were discovered. The body was entrusted to medical professionals for examination, while investigators meticulously combed through the crime scene. It was swiftly deduced that the victim met her demise elsewhere. Save for the towel stains, no blood was found near the body, and markings on the ground indicated the body had been dragged from the road to the roadside. Upon the towel and the victim's body, the authorities discovered their initial potential leads. They came across numerous human hairs, as well as pubic hairs and dog fur. It was assumed that the first two samples belonged to the perpetrator, potentially someone with a canine companion. Medical professionals concluded that Tanya had suffered a severe blow to the head from a heavy object, but the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. They also confirmed that the victim had been sexually assaulted. A semen sample was collected from her body, but at that time, DNA analysis was not yet widely utilized in forensics. All they could ascertain was that the suspect had type B blood. Since these clues did not lead the detectives to the killer, they began compiling a list of potential suspects. Their attention initially turned to Tim, the victim's ex-boyfriend. After speaking with Tanya's relatives and friends, the police learned about the issues in their relationship and constant arguments both before and after the birth of their son. It was revealed that when Tanya decided to end the relationship, Tim was against it. He was unwilling to part ways with Tanya and continued to try to persuade her. Tim persistently called Tanya, visited her, and behaved as if he could not accept the breakup. Investigators considered the possibility that on New Year's Eve, Tim might have followed Tanya to the bar, leading to a confrontation that ended in murder. They brought Tim in for questioning, but he denied any involvement. Tim also agreed to provide hair samples. Although experts could not extract DNA from them, they were able to compare the hairs under a microscope, which would have been sufficient to establish similarity. However, Tim's hair significantly differed from those found on the victim's body and the towel. Based on this fact, he was temporarily ruled out as a suspect. Following this, detectives shifted their focus to everyone who was present at the bar on New Year's Eve. Vanita was questioned about any individuals who may have acted strangely or aggressively towards Tanya, but she maintained that the evening went smoothly without any incidents. The police found out that Tanya briefly dated another man after breaking up with her boyfriend, who coincidentally was the bartender at the bar where she celebrated New Year's Eve. Despite speaking with him, he denied any involvement in the murder, stating that he went to a party with friends after finishing his shift. Investigators discovered that he did attend the party, but did not arrive immediately after leaving work. After gathering testimonies, the police theorized that he had enough time to commit the crime. Interviews with bar patrons revealed that Tanya was last seen alive at 1:15 a.m., but no one saw her leave. Residents near where the body was found recalled passing by around 2 a.m. and did not see a body. It was determined that Tanya was killed within an hour and a half from when she was last seen, and the man did not have a solid alibi during that time. Although he took a polygraph test with inconclusive results, his blood type did not match that of the killer as determined from a semen sample, leading to his elimination as a suspect. Despite efforts to find other suspects, the investigation hit a dead end due to lack of evidence or witnesses. The investigators were almost certain that the perpetrator must have resided in the vicinity where the body was discovered. The location was secluded from main roads, positioned at the edge of a vast residential area. It seemed unlikely to the police that an unfamiliar culprit would transport the victim's body there in a car without any knowledge of the area. Consequently, the case remained unsolved for numerous years. Timothy, who was merely 18 months old when his mother passed away, was brought up by his father and Tanya's family. They collectively made the decision to shield the child from the truth regarding his mother's fate. As he matured, relatives informed him that Tanya had died in a car accident. This narrative persisted until he reached the age of 14. With Christmas fast approaching, the boy became inquisitive about the gift his father had prepared for him. Timothy made the choice to explore his father's closet, only to stumble upon something much more unsettling than a mere present. He stumbled upon a letter penned by his father addressed to the renowned TV host, Montel Williams. In the letter, the man implored him to shed light on the unsolved murder of Tanya, hoping that the exposure would aid in progressing the case. Timothy discovered detailed descriptions of the murder in the letter, and that was how he learned the true circumstances surrounding his mother's demise. In the early 2000s, the local police department decided to reopen Tanya's case, anticipating that advancements in DNA analysis would assist in identifying the culprit. Consequently, all available evidence was sent to the laboratory for examination. After thorough analysis, experts determined that the blood on the blue towel discovered near the body did not belong to Tanya, but to an unidentified man. His DNA profile was obtained and uploaded to the Federal Bureau of Investigation database, yet no matches were found. The case once again went cold until it was reopened in 2015, precisely 30 years after the murder. The killer's DNA had still not surfaced in the Federal Bureau of Investigation database, prompting detectives to adopt a different strategy. Modern technology enabled them to not only search for exact matches, but also for partial ones. They explored the possibility of finding relatives of the perpetrator within the database, hoping it would lead them to a suspect. Their search eventually honed in on a specific individual from the Federal Bureau of Investigation database. Although his DNA showed some similarities to the sample from Tanya's killer, the resemblance was not strong. The police delved into his family background, even reaching out to his relatives. The family agreed to help and provided their DNA samples for comparison. However, after analyzing the samples, experts came to a disappointing conclusion. The family had no connection to the suspect, leaving the detectives once again with no substantial leads. In 2018, journalist Tony Adam took an interest in the case. Despite not being a crime specialist, his personal interest in the subject drew him to the unsolved murder of Tanya. He reached out to the investigators handling the case, expressing his desire to help. Detectives initially approached his offer with skepticism, given his lack of background in criminal investigations. However, with the lack of progress in the case, they decided to allow him to join the investigation. Tony established connections with Tanya's family, demonstrating his genuine interest in resolving the case and the significant effort he was putting into it. For example, he worked to garner media coverage for the case, bringing additional attention to it and offering a fresh perspective to an investigation that had lingered for over 3 decades. A year later, in 2019, detectives decided to make another attempt to find the killer's relatives, seeking assistance from Parabon, a company specializing in genetic genealogy. In a previous attempt, investigators solely focused on potential relatives through the Federal Bureau of Investigation database, which contains samples from various criminals. However, Parabon utilized public genetic databases with a significantly broader scope. These databases allowed anyone to upload their DNA sample for purposes like finding relatives or exploring their ancestry. Experts meticulously sifted through potential relatives of the killer, methodically analyzing their family trees to pinpoint someone who matched the suspect's criteria. They were searching for a man who was old enough to commit the crime in 1985 and resided in the area. This process spanned nearly a year, posing an incredibly challenging task for the experts. Nonetheless, in February 2020, they ultimately identified a man who could potentially be the killer. 57-year-old Daniel Wells, a resident of the same city at the time of the murder. Detectives delved into Wells' background and discovered that he had encountered the police multiple times in the late 80s, with arrests for assault and indecent exposure. As of 2020, Daniel was still residing in Pensacola, working as a carpenter, and has a family. However, detectives required a DNA sample from him for a direct comparison with the killer's profile to confirm his potential connection to the murder. Due to the lack of concrete evidence, police proceeded cautiously with Daniel, fearing he might flee upon realization of being identified. They placed him under surveillance, and an opportunity arose when Daniel discarded a cigarette butt near his workplace. Investigators seized the cigarette butt and promptly sent it to the lab. DNA was extracted from the saliva on the filter and compared with the killer's DNA from Tanya's case, resulting in a perfect match. 35 years later, the police finally apprehended the perpetrator on the same day he was identified. Despite possessing the results of his DNA analysis, investigators were determined to extract a confession from Daniel. They proceeded with caution, opting not to reveal all their evidence at once. Under the guise of a routine ID check, patrol officers were instructed to pull over the suspect's car. Detectives then approached Daniel, informing him that he needed to accompany them to the station. Deliberately keeping him in suspense, they withheld any additional information. During the interrogation, investigators skillfully steered the conversation towards Tanya's murder, questioning Daniel about his whereabouts that fateful night. Initially, he feigned ignorance of the woman, only to be confronted with the revelation that his DNA was found at the crime scene. Despite his continued denials, Daniel's nerves began to fray with each passing question. Detectives underscored the irrefutable nature of the DNA evidence, leaving him with no recourse but to come clean. They made it abundantly clear that the only path to mitigating his predicament was through a confession, a tactic that ultimately proved successful. At a certain juncture, Daniel began to divulge information. Initially, he attempted to rationalize the presence of his DNA by suggesting a sexual encounter with Tanya on that night, a claim that detectives swiftly dismissed, pressing him for the truth. Eventually, Daniel admitted to the murder of Tanya on New Year's Eve. However, his narrative raised significant doubts. He confessed to meeting Tanya at a bar, offering her a ride home after she expressed the need for one. According to his account, they proceeded to his residence, where they drank alcohol and engaged in consensual intimacy. An altercation ensued, the cause of which Daniel professed to have no recollection of. In a moment of fury, he seized a hefty wooden cutting board and struck Tanya on the head, inadvertently causing her demise. Faced with the grim reality of her death, Daniel panicked, relocating her body to the eventual discovery site before discarding her belongings and returning home. When questioned about the dog hairs discovered on the victim's garments and towel, he elaborated that his roommate owned a black Labrador, and those hairs were indeed black. Daniel's explanation seemed like an effort to downplay his own culpability. It was difficult to fathom that Tanya willingly engaged in consensual intercourse with him, only to have such a heated argument moments later that resulted in her demise. He also asserted that she died after being struck on the head. Nonetheless, medical professionals possessed irrefutable proof that the cause of death was strangulation. A more plausible scenario would be that Daniel tried to assault Tanya, and she fought back. He then hit her on the head but quickly realized she was still breathing, prompting him to strangle her. Despite the suspect's admission likely not aligning with the actual sequence of events, the detectives had all the necessary evidence. Daniel was apprehended on charges of murder and detained. Subsequently, investigators reached out to Tanya's family members, including her son, to relay the long-awaited news. Timothy couldn't contain his emotions and expressed gratitude to the authorities for ultimately apprehending his mother's killer. However, Daniel was not destined to stand trial and face the consequences for his deeds. Just a fortnight after his arrest, his lifeless body was discovered in his cell. The examination revealed that he had taken his own life. Tanya's loved ones were disheartened by the fact that the perpetrator had evaded the possibility of spending years in prison. Nevertheless, they eventually found solace in the knowledge that after 35 arduous years, the case had finally been resolved.
On December 15, 1997, a fire broke out in the Philadelphia home of Lucidia Cuevas and Pedro Vera. While their two older children were saved, their 10-day-old baby girl, Delimar Cuevas Vera, tragically did not survive. The circumstances surrounding the fire raise questions about whether it was a deliberate act or simply a tragic accident. Lucidia Cuevas, known as Luz, was born in 1971. She hails from Hispanic descent and made her way to the United States at a young age. The exact year of her arrival remains a mystery, but what we do know is that she faced challenges adapting to her new environment and mastering the language, leading her to start working at a tender age. It was not long before she crossed paths with Pedro Vera, and love blossomed swiftly between them. Their union culminated in marriage and the blessing of children. In her early 20s, Luz welcomed her first child, a son, followed by another son a few years later. However, the desire for a daughter lingered in her heart. At the age of 26, she found herself expecting once more, this time carrying a baby girl. The joy she felt was immeasurable. On December 5, 1997, the day arrived for Luz to give birth to her baby girl. The delivery went smoothly, and a few weeks later, mother and daughter were back in their Feltonville residence in North Philadelphia. Delimar Cuevas Vera was the name Luz had already chosen for her newborn daughter, making her the proud mother of a little girl. Despite being her third child, Delimar was her first daughter, bringing immense happiness to their household. With Christmas approaching, the family decided to celebrate by hosting a small gathering at their Philadelphia home. On December 15, 1997, Luz and her loved ones came together for a joyous occasion. As the night progressed, everything seemed normal. Luz put baby Delimar to sleep in her crib in the front upstairs bedroom, before heading downstairs to tend to some chores. Pedro, being the kind soul that he is, was helping Carolyn Correa, his distant cousin, fix her car's brakes. The task took longer than expected, prompting Carolyn to return inside the house. Upon re-entering, she found Luz, and the two engaged in light-hearted conversation. Luz was in the middle of her chores when she decided to engage in a conversation with Carolyn, as they rarely met and had a lot to catch up on. During their talk, Luz learned about Carolyn's newborn child and was thrilled by the news. She wanted to continue their conversation, but it was abruptly interrupted by a loud noise from the second floor of the house. By 7 p.m., thick smoke began to fill the house, signaling a fire. As the smoke descended the stairs where Luz and Carolyn were, it became evident that the house was indeed on fire. Luce managed to get her two sons out of the house, while Carolyn went outside to call for help. Luce's immediate concern was her baby, who was still upstairs. She rushed up the stairs and was met with a wall of smoke in the hallway. She attempted to reach her baby's room, but the flames forced her to retreat. Alone and desperate, Luce ran into the street, screaming for assistance. Thankfully, nearby residents came to her aid. Despite their efforts, the flames were too intense for one of the neighbor's sons to enter the house. Fortunately, the fire department arrived promptly and extinguished the fire within 15 minutes. The second floor of Luce and Pedro's home suffered significant damage, particularly Delimar's room, which was completely destroyed. When firefighters searched the room, they were unable to locate baby Delimar. Luce and Pedro were devastated to learn that their 10-day-old baby was missing. Luce was inconsolable and pleaded with the firefighters, refusing to believe that her baby was gone. Luce was absolutely certain that Delimar was not in her crib when she ascended the stairs. The shock was overwhelming. Her face was scorched and she inhaled smoke, a sight that the firefighters could not ignore. They believed that due to the trauma and injuries, she was incapable of comprehending the recent events. The dreadful incident left Luce and her family in a state of shock. A swift investigation was launched. Throughout the inquiry, they discovered debris particles in the charred room that bore a resemblance to human ashes. But what sparked the fire that claimed the life of a child? The fire was simply a tragic accident. It seemed that the flames ignited due to a dangerously rigged extension cord connected to a space heater. Once the investigation concluded, the case of the 10-day-old Delimar Cuevas Vera's death was closed. However, the tale did not conclude there. It was evident that Luce and her family endured immense suffering. Losing their only daughter just days before Christmas felt like a curse upon the family. While the rest of the family accepted the case's resolution, Luce remained steadfast in her belief that Delimar was still alive, as no concrete evidence of her tiny body was ever found. The family refrained from holding a funeral for baby Delimar. They also refrained from obtaining a death certificate, fearing to do so through the courts since no body was recovered. As time passed, Luce persistently maintained that her baby was alive. The situation escalated to the point where it drove a wedge between her and her family, leading her husband Pedro to file for divorce. It almost appeared as though Luce was losing her sanity. But what fueled Luce's unwavering conviction that her daughter was alive? Did she possess any evidence to support her claims? In a separate interview, Luce mentioned that on the day her house caught fire, she did enter her baby's room, only to find the crib empty. Furthermore, she noticed that the bedroom window was ajar. She sought answers to her inquiries. Luce was left perplexed by the mysterious circumstances surrounding her daughter's disappearance. The empty crib, the open window on a freezing night, and the lack of any remains only added to her confusion. Despite her desire to involve the police, the daunting legal costs deterred her from pursuing the matter further. Nevertheless, Luce held on to hope that one day she would be reunited with her daughter. It wasn't until January 24, 2004, at a family birthday party in Philadelphia, that a glimmer of hope emerged. Among the guests, Luce spotted a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to her long-lost daughter, Delimar. The resemblance was uncanny, down to the dimple on the girl's cheek that mirrored one of her sons. As she learned the girl's identity, Aaliyah Hernandez, Carolyn's daughter, a wave of realization washed over Luce. Could it be that her daughter, presumed dead in a tragic fire, was alive all along? The pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place, especially with Carolyn's presence on the night of the fire. The truth was within reach, and Luce was determined to uncover it. Despite her strong conviction that the girl at the party was Delimar, Luce understood the importance of gathering concrete evidence to support her claim. Drawing inspiration from crime shows, she knew that obtaining a DNA sample was crucial. Taking a bold step, Luce approached the girl under the pretense of removing gum from her hair, managing to discreetly collect a few strands. Despite having what she believed to be solid proof, Luce faced skepticism when she presented the hair samples to the police. Despite her persistence, they dismissed her claims, refusing to conduct any DNA tests. The closed case of the house fire and the assumption of Delimar's death led to their reluctance. It seemed logical to run a test for confirmation, but unfortunately, they did not see it that way. When the police requested Carolyn to provide a birth certificate for her daughter Aaliyah, she promptly complied. The birth certificate indicated that the girl was born on January 6, 1998, through a home birth. Despite Luce's insistence that the child belonged to her, the authorities decided not to pursue the matter further. Despite Luce's persistent demands for testing to prove her claim, the police stood firm in their decision. In her determination to establish the truth, Luce sought assistance from Pennsylvania State Representative Angel Cruz. After a lengthy meeting with Cruz, Luce passionately presented her case, recounting her arduous journey to find her daughter and her belief that Delimar had been abducted. Although initially skeptical, Angel Cruz found Luce's account credible and decided to pass on the information, along with the hair evidence, to the district attorney's office, prompting an investigation. 2 weeks later, the DNA results confirmed Luce's suspicions. Aaliyah was indeed Delimar, her presumed deceased daughter. Following the revelation, the police conducted a DNA test on Carolyn, confirming that Aaliyah was, in fact, Delimar. Carolyn was then separated from Aaliyah, who had been proven to be the missing child. The mystery remained. What motivated Carolyn's actions, and how did she manage to carry out such a deceitful act? It was later revealed that Carolyn Correa had a history of challenging pregnancies and child loss. Despite the unfortunate events, Carolyn was blessed with 3 children. Her first 2 sons were healthy, and her youngest child was a daughter. However, despite already having 3 children, she made the decision to abduct Delimar when she was only 10 days old. Records indicate that Carolyn did indeed give birth to a baby at her home just 3 days before the fire at Luce's residence in Philadelphia. The circumstances surrounding the fate of that baby remain unknown. During that time, Carolyn was with her boyfriend, who believed she was pregnant with a girl and that he was the father. A close friend of Carolyn also attested to assisting her during the home birth. Upon learning that she was not Aaliyah's biological mother, Carolyn was shocked. She also refused to accept that Aaliyah was actually Delimar, the daughter of Luce and Pedro. The investigation was promptly reopened, revealing that Carolyn had used car troubles as a pretext to gain entry into Luce and Pedro's home after a party. She took advantage of a moment when Luce was distracted to steal the newborn from her crib and set a fire to conceal her actions. Carolyn then transported the baby across state lines to her residence in Willingboro, New Jersey, where she claimed to have given birth to the child just days later. She renamed the baby Aaliyah Hernandez and raised her as her own for 6 years. Carolyn provided Aaliyah with a private education and enrolled her in beauty pageant training until she encountered Luce on January 24, 2004. Further investigation into Carolyn's background uncovered a shocking revelation. This was not her first encounter with the law. A year following the abduction, she was found guilty in connection with a 1996 theft and fraud case, as it was revealed that she had been embezzling business checks from the medical office where she was employed. Interestingly, she resorted to arson in an attempt to cover her tracks, setting fire to the medical office to conceal evidence. Fortunately, no one was injured, but Carolyn was sentenced to 5 years of probation for her actions. Carolyn faced charges of kidnapping, arson, assault, concealing the whereabouts of a child and interfering with the custody of a child, and was detained on bail of $1 million. However, numerous unanswered questions lingered. These included how she managed to deceive her friends and family for so long, and why Pedro, who was Carolyn's cousin, did not recognize his own child. While the truth remains uncertain, one thing is clear. Carolyn could not have executed the kidnapping alone. She likely had an accomplice. The case proceeded to trial, but became increasingly convoluted. Carolyn accused Delimar's father, Pedro, of being complicit in the kidnapping scheme. There were even rumors and allegations that Pedro was romantically involved with his cousin, Carolyn, and that the plan was for the three of them to form a family. However, these were mere speculations and remained unproven. The judge acknowledged the likelihood of a second person being involved, but no evidence was found. Subsequently, her lawyer cited insanity as her defense in the case. Nevertheless, Carolyn was sentenced to 9 to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in the future.